I do see a lot of myself in Bernie, I'm not going to lie, where people constantly misunderstand his position, yell at him endlessly, and act like he's brand new, act like he's behaving brand new. And then you go back in time, no matter how far back you go in time, he literally is saying the same exact things. But here's another moment of like theatrics that I thought was odd here.
Stand right there. That is not your nature to just stand where you're told to stand. Give it a try.
Stand right there. That is not your nature to stand where you're told to stand, but give it a try.
There. There you go. Raise your right hand, Mr. Roberts. Do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation?
Bernie gets so bullied and I'm sick of it. Yeah. Stop bullying the old man, okay? Now, everyone, speaking of Bernie, he's in a little bit of trouble because he had a critique on the H1B visa program. And I don't disagree with Bernie Sanders' critique, even though I haven't read the entirety of what he was saying. So maybe there's some stuff in there that's actually crazy and like nativist or whatever. But the H1B visa program absolutely is utilized in a way to create further expendable and more exploitable labor. I don't know why people consider that to be racist and unacceptable to openly say. I have been saying it nonstop. I haven't stopped saying that as well. So I don't know why people would get mad at Bernie Sanders also saying it, because that is the object of, I mean, that is the purpose of this program. Of course, once again, anything that the government does is going to be packaged in a way that makes sense. So the H1B visa program is going to be packaged as though this is a way to offer citizenship to the best and brightest all around the globe. And there is certainly some truth to that as well, right? That is true. But that's just spin at the end of the day. The reality of the matter is we destroy the global south, and then we take advantage of all of the highest achievers globally by creating an immigration structure where we take educated workers in an effort to displace the American workforce, because those guys will, due to the currency exchange rate, especially if they're sending money back home, which there's nothing wrong with, by the way. It's fantastic. That's why economists that are not ideologically on board with the way I see the world will say this is a win-win. Okay, even though I also consider it to be a win-win. Due to the currency exchange rate, they are oftentimes interested or willing to take on jobs at a pay cut. But more importantly than that, if an H1B visa worker loses their job, they get deported. So if an H1B visa worker loses their job and they get deported, they are even more exploitable. So the solution to make this process more ethical and not a mechanism to displace and depress American wages is to ensure that there are safeguards that maintain wage parity and a parity for benefits offered and a protection, additional protections offered to all workers, including H1B visa workers. Protection from deportation, for example. Now, if you were to do that, then that makes sense. Then bosses can't use the H1B visa program to create extra exploited to create a hyper exploitable secondary labor market. Okay, that's it. That's the real solution. But of course, that solution is not necessarily one that benefits the capital owners. Bernie Sanders is in a lot of hot water. Let's take a look at what he said. News: we need major reforms in the H1B program. Okay, is it in here? No, these are older videos from back in the day when Bernie Sanders said open borders is a Koch brothers policy. And the last time he talked about H1B workers and the visa structure. And And he has complained about it quite a bit. This is not new for Bernie Sanders. So let's read what he had to say. He wrote this yesterday. The current chairman of the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions today releases the following statement on H1B guest worker visas and the recent debate concerning the program. Bernie said, there has been a lot of discussion lately about the H1B guest worker program. Elon Musk and a number of other billionaire tech company owners have argued that this federal program is vital to our economy because of the scarcity of the highly skilled American engineers and other tech workers. I disagree. The main function of the H-1B visa program and other guest worker initiatives is not to hire the best and the brightest, but rather to replace good-paying American jobs with low-wage indentured servants from abroad. The cheaper the labor they hire, the more money the billionaires make. Where's the issue with this statement? This is 100% correct. The notion that there aren't skilled American tech workers out there that could be doing these jobs is completely, the notion that there are none in the current labor pool is not only silly, it's an abject lie. It's a lie that is channeled through mainstream resources as well, especially when you consider the hundreds of thousands of layoffs that have taken place in our Silicon Valley quantitative easing induced bubble that finally burst a little bit. In 2022 and 2023, the top 30 corporations using this program laid off at least 85,000 American workers while they hired over 34,000 new H-1B guest workers. There are estimates that as many as 33% of all new information technology jobs in America are being filled by guest workers. Further, according to the Census Bureau data, there are millions of Americans with advanced degrees in science, technology, engineering, and math who are not currently employed in those professions. If there is really a shortage of skilled tech workers in America, why did Tesla lay off over 7,500 American workers this year, including many software developers and engineers at its factory in Austin, Texas, while being approved to employ thousands of H-1B guest workers? Moreover, if these jobs are only going to the best and brightest, why has Tesla employed H-1B guest workers as associate accountants for as little as $58,000, associate mechanical engineers for as little as $70,000 a year, and associate material planners for as little as $80,000 a year? Those don't sound like highly specialized jobs that are for the top 0.1%, Musk claimed this week. If this program is really supposed to be about importing workers with highly advanced degrees in science and technology, why are H-1B guest workers being employed as dog trainers, massage therapists, cooks, and English teachers? Can we really not find English teachers in America? Let's be clear. To the extent that there may be labor shortages in our country in some highly specialized areas that need to be filled by employees from above through the H-1B program, we must utilize this program as a very short-term and temporary approach. In the long term, if the United States is going to be able to compete in a global economy, we must make sure that we have the best educated workforce in the world. And one way to help make that happen is to substantially increase the guest worker fees large corporations pay to fund scholarships, apprenticeships, and job training opportunities for American workers. This is something that I have advocated for from my first days as a U.S. Senator. Further, we also must significantly raise the minimum wage for guest workers, allow them to easily switch jobs, and make sure that corporations are required to aggressively recruit American workers first before they can hire workers from overseas. The widespread corporate abuse of the H-1B program must be ended. Bottom line, it should never be cheaper for a corporation to hire a guest worker from overseas than an American worker. Mr. Musk, Mr. Ramaswamy, and others have argued that we need a highly skilled and well-educated workforce. They are right, but the answer, however, is not to bring in cheap labor from abroad. The answer is to hire qualified American workers first and to make certain that we have an education system that produces the kind of workforce that our country needs for the jobs of the future. And that's not just engineering. We are in desperate need of more doctors, nurses, dentists, teachers, electricians, plumbers, and a host of other professions. 30 years ago, the economic elite and political establishment in both major parties told us not to worry about the loss of blue-collar manufacturing jobs that would come as a result of disastrous, unfettered trade agreements like NAFTA and permanent normal trade relations with China. They promised that those lost jobs would be more than offset by the many good paying white collar information technology jobs that would be created in the United States. Well, that turned out to be a big lie. Not only have corporations exported millions of blue collar manufacturing jobs to China, Mexico, and other low wage countries, they are now importing hundreds of thousands of low paid guest workers from abroad to fill the white collar technology jobs that are available. At a time of massive income and wealth inequality, when the richest 3 people in America now own more wealth than the bottom half of our country, and when the CEOs of major corporations make almost 300 times more than their average workers, we need fundamental changes in our economic policies. We need an economy that works for all, not just the few. And one important way forward in that direction is to bring about major reforms in the H1B program. Now, of course, what's interesting about this process is that because the H1B worker structure benefits capital owners, both the Democratic Party and the Republicans will end up defending it. They will defend it because, not because they are, nice, or because they want immigration into the country, or because they love, the idea that America is a land of prosperity for the migrants that are coming in here, well-educated migrants that are coming in here to work these jobs. They only care because, once again, there is additional exploitation, which means that profits will go up because it means that you can depress wages further. Okay? So that is the real reason. And the real reason why people can be endlessly racist to the undocumented migrants on both sides of the aisle as well is because there is always an endless well of undocumented migrants that are crossing the border to come and work at these very low wage jobs. Now we're not talking about the H1B visa program. Now we're talking about migration patterns. Okay? And the more people take a reactionary stance towards migration from either party, the easier it is to dominate them. And the more you dominate them, the more you dehumanize them, the easier it is to exploit them. There will never come a time where, no matter how cruel the border policies are, where people from Guatemala, people from Mexico, people from El Salvador, and many other places are not going to seek refuge in the United States of America. They will always come to the United States of America because of what we have done to their countries. We've destabilized them. Classy if you're rich, H1B, trashy if you're poor, undocumented. Most of this argument from the right unironically stem from white nativist anti-immigrant stances. They think Indians and the Chinese are lesser than they are. Okay? They get mad that Indian workers and Chinese workers are replacing them. But they would get mad if it was Polish workers as well. Trust me. Because there is a real, beyond the white supremacy, there's a real anger and resentment that people feel that they misdirect towards their fellow workers. There is no difference between a Indian worker or an Italian worker or a Polish worker and an American worker. There is no difference there at all. They have the same exact class interests. It is always the systems that are designed in a way to pit you against the Indian or Chinese H1B visa workers. Just so you understand. Megaphonic says, my read of this is that 2 things can be true. Bernie's right in pointing out the inherent exploitations of the existing H1B system and providing common sense reforms to fix them, while also being wrong to make a nativist adjacent argument about it. Americans should get jobs first instead of just welcoming immigrants as Americans. It feels incongruous for him to support easing immigration restrictions while making this argument. Yeah, the only part of this that comes across as like a little, if you're hypersensitive, and don't believe that Bernie Sanders cares about like migrants or whatever, then you can read this part as like, oh, well, or where is it? If you're hypersensitive about it, I think like there's a couple parts where he just like basically talks about like these have to be American workers first. How is Americans should get the jobs first a little nativist, bro? But I don't think it is. I don't think it is at all. Because if you understand the H1B visa guest worker program to be created specifically to displace the American labor pool with an easier to exploit labor force that you ship from overseas, then yeah, of course you're going to say, no, you got to make sure that you hire Americans first in the United States of America. Because if you don't do that, then you arrive at another point that Bernie Sanders makes very clearly here. You arrive at NAFTA. You arrive at permanent normal trade relations with China. He's absolutely right about that. We talk about how American manufacturing was gutted and destroyed. We talk about the ghost cities in middle America, where places that relied on one corporation basically dominating the town and being its lifeline, only to leave that town and leave it desolate as a consequence. And they leave that town because they ship the manufacturing jobs overseas. And at the time, the way that this was packaged by liberals and Republicans, who are also liberal alike, was to, one, on the Republican side, this is great for our profits. This is great for our profits. This is going to do free trade. This is incredible. This is an incredible opportunity. And for the liberals, the argument was, well, we're helping these countries. Now, of course, in most circumstances, American dominance continues, and therefore, those countries are not able to take in the foreign capital and use it to their advantage. China is the one exception to the rule, and we have never forgiven them for it. If China also operated in the exact same ways as Mexico, because Mexico is so close to the United States of America, so deeply entrenched in American politics and American intervention, Mexico was not able to, due to corruption and the implementation of a narco state, was not able to distribute its funds, its foreign capital, in the same way to engage in even development and urbanization in the way that China did. China, due to being seen as a counter to the potential Soviet regime with the Sino-Soviet split and a multitude of different factors, was able to take in that foreign capital and evenly distribute it amongst this population through central planning. And like I said, if your attitude was that China will never be able to reach the, reach a competitive level and become a hegemon that will outcompete the United States of America in key sectors in a matter of 3 to 4 decades, then yeah, you're thinking, yeah, we can consistently keep dominating them and use China and the Chinese population as, slave labor overseas. The problem, however, is that due to central planning, due to a genuine interest in building the Chinese nation state, China was able to take that foreign capital and distribute it in a way that genuinely improved the lives of 1 billion Chinese people, taking 800 million Chinese people out of the throes of abject, extreme global poverty in a matter of decades. This is unconscionable, and it is completely unacceptable, and that is the reason why we are already in the throes of a second Cold War, this time against the red threat of China. The liberal take on what he said is in fact the racist take. My attitude on this has always been that there is enough wealth to go around, whether it be through the H1B visa program, whether it be the processing and documenting of the 10 million plus undocumented migrants that work in the agricultural sector, in the construction field, and create wage parity for them so that they are not used as an endlessly replaceable, hyper-exploited second labor pool, a permanent underclass that is used against the documented U.S. labor force. That is the real solution. That is the real way to get out of this problem. But of course, that would require shrinking profit margins, and that would be unacceptable. What did you say? If you really think anything Bernie said is racist, I genuinely don't think your opinions will win any elections anytime soon. I mean, that's also a tricky conversation, because if Bernie had said something genuinely racist, there are plenty of genuinely racist people. There are plenty of, like, anti-Indian sentiment, for example, goes a long way on both Twitter and in general. We must not find ourselves in the throes of right-wing reactionary politics simply because it will be beneficial. That's the attitude that the Democrats have. That's the attitude of the Democratic Party in general. As an H1B visa holder, I ain't rich, and I'm easily susceptible to being fired if I join a union and subsequently get deported if I don't find a job in 2 months' time. Also, the path to citizenship or green card takes so long. Have already spent 10 years in the U.S., 15 plus years to get my green card. Brian So yes, we are stuck in limbo half our lives. Exactly. This is the reality of the H-1B visa guest worker program. This is what it is. This is the reason why H-1B visa workers are seen as really valuable alternative. Once again, do you think Bernie is nativist under the cover? No, I don't. I don't think Bernie is a nativist under the cover. Like, I don't think he's like secretly a racist guy who's like, I do not care about the Indian workers. I am, obviously, as you guys know, pro-immigration, pro-immigrant, and also pro-workers' rights. The problem is most people cannot see beyond the neat little confines of American capitalism. So if you cannot envision a world where capital dominates, you cannot understand my advocacy. And if you cannot see past the point of capitalism, if you treat capitalism as though it is the norm, as though there is no other alternative, or the alternatives are far worse and far more deadly, far more devastating, then yes, of course, you are going to constantly look for bandage solutions. And those bandage solutions are going to always be right-wing reactionary. If you cannot envision a world where the American criminal justice system is dramatically changed, right? Where we focus on rehabilitation rather than incarceration, where we try to solve the underlying material inequalities where crime manifests, then yeah, you're going to be like, crime is out of control. We have to do something about it. You're going to have the shaky Gurga, Uncle Jenk attitude on crime. You're going to say, there's crime everywhere. We got to deal with it. We got to deal with it. How do we deal with it? Well, there more apprehension, more detention, more draconian measures, please. I look to the past 200 plus years of American history and American attitudes towards crime and punishment, and I see an abject failure of that kind of attitude. America has some of the worst crime and punishment systems on the planet. One of the worst, one of the most inhumane structures for criminal punishment. Sure, we like to think highly of ourselves and say, well, at least we're not caning people like they do in Singapore or Malaysia, right? We don't have corporal punishment, but we still torture the overwhelming majority of criminals under the overwhelming majority of convicts, overwhelming majority of criminals under our criminal justice system. We punish them excessively. We simply find other alternative methods of execution. Well, it's still capital punishment at the end of the day, a practice that has been banned in many other comparable OECD nations. Somebody in the chat claims that Bernie is a nationalist. That's funny. Yeah, they're gonna be shameless about it and say Bernie is a nationalist socialist. Bernie's a Strasserite. Bernie. Feel the burn. Not to mention that the U.S. is responsible for a lot of the third world violence, both directly and indirectly. Absolutely. I think the irony also revolves around, and we're going to go back to, a different time where, well, lo and behold, Bernie Sanders still is warning about H-1B foreign workers replacing American labor. Let's take a look.
Corporations whose main argument is, we just can't find Americans to do this work, and we just need to go all over the world to bring people in. If you listen to them, they will tell you two things. First, in terms of low-skilled jobs, they say they need foreign workers to do the jobs that Americans just won't do. And then, Madam President, this is what really gets me. They tell us that they need more H-1B visas because Americans are just not smart.
I do see a lot of myself in Bernie, I'm not going to lie, where people constantly misunderstand his position, yell at him endlessly, and act like he's brand new, act like he's behaving brand new, and then you go back in time. No matter how far back you go in time, he literally is saying the same exact things. Okay? It's just like, they'll be like, oh, Bernie, why are you acting so brand new about this? Oh my God. And it's ironic. Like, I can't, in good conscience, understand how so many liberals are chirping at Bernie Sanders over the H-1B visa take, okay, claiming that this is racism, claiming that this is white nationalism, when those very same liberals, not that long ago, before the election, were hyping up Donald Trump's border bill that Joe Brandon was pushing. So which is it? It makes no sense. On the one hand, these guys are like, we got to do border control. We got to kill these migrants. We got to kill all of them. I'm a Democrat, by the way. But then simultaneously, they're like, wait, what? You mean that in a sector where there is unimaginable layoffs, these guys still have room for H1B visa workers? Because it kind of feels like it's used as a mechanism to displace the existing American labor force and bring in, without any sort of wage parity initiatives, create a structure where you are basically taking advantage of a labor force, an educated labor force that's coming from overseas, from countries that we have dominated for years and kept poor for the most part. And it's odd. It's odd to take this approach where you're like, we have to start killing Guatemalan immigrants at the border, and then simultaneously say, Bernie is the real racist. Here's an example of this. Here's a prominent example of this from prominent liberal, not even prominent, but just like a liberal that loves complaining. Kentuckian Milan Coniste says liberals calling Bernie anti-immigrant for correctly pointing out that corporations love H-1Bs because it lets them exploit immigrant workers is real rich considering how ready and willing, yada, yada, yada. Armand Domaluski responds and says, we're calling Bernie out because he, A, explicitly lies about the program, saying it covers cashiers and dog walkers, and B, he parrots reactionary arguments about immigrants cutting American wages, which is a flat-out lie. Not that long ago, only a couple months prior, he says Kamala Harris ended the Trump border crisis. The audacity, barbarism critic says, the audacity of these libs have to pretend they weren't repeating right-wing border crisis and promoting Donald Trump's immigration bill not 2 months ago. I wonder what's worse for immigrants, reforming the H-1B program or shutting down the border. They truly expect none of us to have a longer memory than Dianne Feinstein. Why do companies want H-1B workers when they could probably outsource for cheaper? They are already doing that. In the field of IT, especially with IT, especially with outsourcing becoming more easily accessible, people oftentimes do outsource. But that's the H-1B. The H-1B visa program is outsourcing in and of itself. That's what it is. H-1B visa is outsourcing for jobs that require you to be here. What is this? Bhaskar also disagrees with Bernie. I think Bernie's complaints are wrong on a few levels, and we need to make the case for benefits of immigration. But Bernie has had these views on H-1 programs forever, and support for varying degrees of restrictionism were a part of social democratic labor-backed movement for decades. Matt Bruenig responds to Noah Smith. It's just absolutely pathetic watching leftists trying to hop on every right populist bandwagon 3 weeks late. Oh, hey guys, we hate Indians taking your jobs too. Aren't we cool and populist? Most pathetic political movement. I think this is a false interpretation, understandably, from Noah Smith, who is paid to be wrong. I don't think that leftists are saying that. Wait, what? Not correct? H-1B employees are usually regular on-site employees? No, I said companies already outsource certain aspects of IT overseas when they can, but H-1B visa, the H-1B visa structure is for workers. They have to be on-site. That's what I said. It's basically importing the outsourced labor into America because some labor you can't outsource. Can you explain how H-1B immigrants earning a wage of 120K are indentured slaves? How is calling these people dog trainers not a Nazi dog whistle? Oh, easy answer. White workers of the world unite. This is yours and Bernie's take, by the way. Yes, you guys are nativists. Yeah, I'm obviously a white nationalist, white nativist guy, and certainly not someone who's been living on U.S. soil since the year 2009, who has advocated for immigrants in more comprehensive ways than you ever will for the rest of your life. As you know, I am an anchor baby myself. But thank you. Thank you. All right. So at least the Nazi was right and honest when they said the H-1Bs because they hate immigrants. So here's the thing. Can you explain how immigrants earning a wage of 120K are indentured slaves? Great question. Let me tell you. If the actual job for that process, which is already lower than what it's supposed to be, because it's, that's how you generate profits under capitalism. If the actual job previously, the wages for that same job previously was $200,000, and now you are able to make someone do more work for only $120,000, then yes, you have successfully lowered the price, lowered the wages for that same exact job, And you're even getting more output from that same worker. Why are you getting more output from that same worker? Because that worker has an additional vector of exploitation. If they lose their job, they have 2 months to gain, 2 months to find gainful employment, or else they get deported. Okay? This is something that I've talked about quite a bit. This is just, incredibly coercive. That is how it works. Because if you lose your job as one of the many H1B visa workers that are currently working on U.S. soil, like many of my chatters, including the one that just talked about their experience, correctly told you, it takes 10 to 15 years minimum to even get a green card through the H1B process. That's number one. Number two, when you don't have a green card, when you don't have permanent residency, when you don't have a pathway to citizenship, you are easier to exploit. That's how it is. I agree with you and Bernie a lot, but was it really hard for him to put a footnote in his take like P.S. racism against brown people bad instead he compared them to dog trainers? No, the reason why he brings up dog trainers in his argument is because the H-1B visa program is not for the tippy top of labor, and there's no other way to get these guys to work in highly specialized fields. And instead, H-1B visa workers are used in entry-level positions to outsource American laborers. That's it. And that's correct. That's not correct, though. There are no H-1B visas for dog trainers. Dude, I like that Bernie Sanders gives a comprehensive breakdown of how exploitative the H-1B visa program is, and liberals laser in on something that they can potentially use to undermine the broader analysis by saying that this guy who has dedicated his life to, social justice, civil liberties, and the like is actually secretly racist. This 900-year-old Jewish man is actually secretly a racist guy in hiding. And it came out now. He's actually racist, and he's using left populism to finally get his true white nativist agenda across. Yeah. I don't think Elon Musk should be allowed to hire H-1B analysts, accountants, or engineers from overseas at Tesla who are paid as little as $52,000 and can have their visa taken away from them by their boss if they complain about unfair or illegal working conditions. That is the point. That is how it works. Eric Levitt says, I don't think that getting paid a six-figure salary to work for a company that you can leave for a different company, so long as the latter also agrees to sponsor a visa, is much like being an indentured servant. But it absolutely is. You can point to how much the median yearly income of people approved to work on U.S. and an H-1B visa is all day, every day. Okay? You can do that all day, every day. But if the actual payment, if the actual median yearly income for the people that are being displaced was significantly higher than that, and also on top of that, these guys literally have to rely on this job to stay in the United States of America, then it doesn't matter. It is exploitative, and that's the reason why people are doing it. Because the inverse of this is so funny to me. Do we think that Elon Musk and all of these mega corporations are actually like, in the ways that these Nazis see the world, trying to make America more brown or something, like actively? Is that what we think is going on? For good reasons, by the way. Like, because diversity is a good thing, right? I believe that. I'm a product of that. Okay? Is that what it is? Do we really think Tesla's like, no, we just really love diversity, and that's why we're doing this? Who are these baby brain chatters? Liberals were already pro-deporting us and wanting to destabilize Mexico with their New York Times hit pieces on judge elections in Mexico, and now with the New York Times story about how homemade top as a gas range stove is crazy. Requires a functioning lab with ventilation systems. Yeah. That's what's really funny. That chatter's an idiot. I'm a software engineer and data scientist. Visa workers are paid on average 30 to 40% less, and the cost of importing the visa workers are on the government as tax credits, and they're used to threaten local engineers from asking for raises. Is very exploitative. Neoliberalism started this insane practice before it was just immigration. This is not nativist nationalist take. Test the nativist argument. Put all Scandinavians in the H-1B, but no farm hospitality worker place. How would those who think for a second H-1B is about anything but tech bro economics might think differently? This is exactly the same as pocket watching your house or car. What's the point at which it is unacceptable depression of wages? Yeah, I mean, it's just a way for liberals to maintain the current status. And some are duped into thinking that this is a way to do anti-racism. And there is a lot of racism involved in this conversation, which is something that I frequently cover as well. And it's always funny because some people will come in here and be like, why aren't you talking about the racism angle when I do? Or when they come in and say, why are you talking so much about the racism angle? This is about displacing American laborers, which I also talk about. It's both. Anyone who says American jobs for Americans is racist or proving that they think Americans are white only. Yeah, that's also another part of this conversation as well. So what's really interesting about this story, in my opinion, is that there is evidence across the board that even suggests that H1B visa worker programs are not used as a mechanism to suppress American wages. Now, the irony there is that it's not because the the documented migration coming into the country is actually getting paid fairly. The argument is that American workers themselves also have so many vectors of pressure that also make themselves endlessly exploitable. That is the real reason. Okay? And even then, it still obviously is cheaper across the board. But beyond the wages, the real vector of exploitation for H1B visa workers comes from the fact that you can make them do two people's jobs. You can lay off half of your workforce and replace it with a much smaller number of H1B workers. Is it because they are simply harder workers? No one across the board is a harder worker than the other worker. It's just that they have more incentive to want to stay in the country. So they are easier to exploit. So sometimes it doesn't even bear itself out in wages. The difference in wages, I mean. So say clearly to your chat that there's no depression of wages tethered to immigration because that's what they're claiming and it's nativist. No, there is. There is a depression of wages tethered to immigration. What are you talking about? How many times have I talked about undocumented migrants in this broadcast? Even outside of the H1B program, what do you think an endless sea of undocumented migration does to American wages? It is specifically the point. The reason why these are not documented laborers, and even if they were documented laborers like the H1B visa program, that would still end up creating some level of wage depression. It's just that even that's not enough for the American capital holders. They want it to be even more, which is why they have to stay undocumented. Therefore, if they ever complain, they can be deported. They have no legal recourse. They have no protection. That's the whole point. That is deliberate. That is the deliberate design of American migration. That is the reason why it is structured in the way that it is. And the same principle goes for legal immigration as well. Fewer immigrants mean more jobs. Wait, what? Not so, economists say. What is this? When the federal government banned the use of farm workers in Mexico, California's tomato growers did not enlist Americans to harvest the fragile crop. They replaced the lost workers with tomato picking machines. The Trump administration on Wednesday embraced a proposal to sharply reduce legal immigration, which has said that it would preserve jobs and lead to higher wages. Wait, I think one thing that you're misunderstanding is, number one, I am not in agreement with Donald Trump. I am not anti-immigration. I'm pro-immigration. I'm pro-processing migrants. Okay? You are? GG. Oh my God, I'm losing my mind. The solution to the constant flow of migration depressing wages is not to stop it dead in its tracks. It's never going to happen regardless. And capital owners know that already. And that's why they rely on the endless white nativist sentiment. Okay. The solution is to document them, process them, and allow them to engage in the process of sectoral bargaining through unions. And therefore, everyone's wages go up. There's enough wealth and enough money in this country that you can seize from the hands of capital owners. That is the entire point of this. It's so funny because this is probably something that I've argued for 1,000,000 times over. And it seems like a lot of people have just sat in this chat and not listened to what I was saying when I was talking about this exact same structure. But economists say the tomato story and a host of related evidence show that there is no clear connection between less immigration and more jobs for Americans. Rather, the prevailing view among economists is that immigration increases economic growth, improving the lives of the immigrants and the lives of the people who are already here. This is the one area where I do agree with the economists. Okay? Immigration is a win-win. Immigration, if done correctly, if done in an ethical manner, would be a win-win. Okay? You get migrant workers that come into the United States and immediately get a pay raise in comparison to the wages that they would have gotten in their home nations. That way they can send money back home. Okay? That's number one. And number two, it improves the material conditions in their host nations, and it improves the conditions in the United States of America if there is a necessity for. I mean, we don't have a finite labor pool, right? We don't have a lump of labor. That is a fallacy. But the way that the immigration structure is designed, where you do actually have a second-class migration and a permanent underclass in the form of undocumented laborers, you do create a lump of labor, or rather you do create a structure where you can basically depress the wages across the board because they can always be replaced. American laborers can always be replaced with undocumented laborers. Honestly, one of your most salient points you ever made, at least for me, is when you said you deal with undocumented immigration by improving the living standards of said country, or make immigration so brutal that it's pretty much a death sentence or a slavery sentence if we did not reform immigration. Yes. There's only two ways out of this. It's not even like a correlation does not mean causation type situation. Like, you can see it. You make the economy scream in Venezuela in the way that the Trump administration did through a rigid sanctions regime. And then lo and behold, what do you get? More Venezuelan migrants coming into the United States of America, seeking asylum, understandably so. That's it. There is a direct line right there. And it happened not that long ago. We saw it. We experienced it. Crowder's making a basic mistake in formal logic. Exploited immigrants do cause suppressed wages, but reporting them does not necessarily raise wages. It's not nativist or contradictory to recognize that. Yes. The only issue here is that the thing I advocate for ends up being infinitely better for every single American worker and all the migrant workers as well. It improves their living conditions, but it harms capital owners. It harms their profit margins. That's it. And that's the reason why it is completely unacceptable. So you can have a conversation about the racism of this subject all day, every day. You can talk about how racist it is. And there is certainly a lot of racism at play here. If you are selling this concept to a reactionary audience, you talk about how Indians are bad and they're not America. You can't create a nation with the children of immigrants, right? Like you can't maintain your country with the children of migrants or whatever people say, which is incredibly racist, right? American dominance also comes from American diversity. There is not a single person in this country, with the exception of Native Americans, that cannot trace their lineage directly back to someone that did not belong on this continent initially. It's so stupid to say this. It's so unimaginably hypocritical to say this, right? Having said that, however, the way, this is why I always recommend Aviva Chomsky's book, specifically talking about the way that like people became undocumented. Okay, she's written extensively on this. They take our jobs in 2007. And 20 other myths about immigration. But the one I'm talking about is one of her latest books, which is Undocumented, How Immigration, where is it? Hold on. Undocumented, How Immigration Became Illegal. She wrote this book in 2014. It's a great book. It basically talks about the concept of an undocumented migrant and why it exists and what it is utilized for at the behest of capital owners. Okay? That's why when people say no human being is undocumented, what are you talking about? Yeah, it sounds like squishy lib, but it also is true. What do you mean undocumented? What's the difference? What is the difference between someone who is an undocumented laborer and a documented laborer? There's no difference in terms of their class interests. It's not like undocumented workers are monolithic. It's not like undocumented immigrants are monolithic. They're coming from all around the planet, from so many different places. different walks of life, different ethnicities, different backgrounds, different creeds. You think they all are monolithic in their understanding where they're coming in? No, the only difference between an undocumented worker and a documented one is paperwork. That's it. They want the exact same thing that you want: shelter, food, fill their bellies, a better future for their children, a better life. That's it. There is no invasion occurring. You know what I mean? That's just racist nonsense.